Welcome to the brewhouse of the Lake Placid Pub and Brewery. Today we'll be taking you on a tour of the brewery and talking about the process of making our beer. Locally brewed house beer is what sets us apart from every other restaurant in Lake Placid. As servers and bartenders, you have a responsibility to be familiar with our beer and be educated in different beer styles and basic operations of a brewery. The ability to speak knowledgeably about our beer is essential in promoting our product and will create long-time loyal customers who will return year after year. Before we get into the brewing process, let's talk about the size of our brewery. We brew on a 7-barrel system, meaning that we can brew 7 barrels of beer per batch. 7 barrels is equal to 14 kegs, or roughly 220 gallons, which is the volume of every tank you will see on this tour. To begin our tour, let's start in the mill room. Malted barley is the first ingredient used in brewing. The brewer will weigh out various malts according to the recipe. Pale malt is the source of most of the starch that will be converted to sugar, while specialty malts, such as caramelized and roasted malts, add color and flavor to the finished product. The sugar extracted from the malt will be fermented into alcohol, so in general, the more malt that is used, the higher the alcohol content of the beer produced. After the malt is weighed out, it is poured into the mill, where it is cracked open, exposing the starch inside. After milling, the malt is ready to move on to the next step, which takes place in the brewhouse. The brewhouse is where the brewer takes the raw ingredients of malt, water, and hops and produces a batch of wort. Wort is the sweet liquid that will be fermented into beer. The brewhouse contains 3 vessels. First is the hot liquor back, or HLB, which holds the treated water used for brewing. Next is the mash tun, where water and malt is mixed. Third is the kettle, where the wort is boiled and hops are added. To begin the first step of the brewing process, known as mashing, the brewer sends the milled malt through the auger into the mash tun. As the malt falls into the mash tun, it is mixed with hot water, creating the mash. The mash is the consistency of oatmeal and is steeped for 1 hour at a temperature between 150 and 155 degrees. Enzymes in the malt break the starch down into sugar, and the flavor and color of the grain is extracted. Lautering is the next step of the brewing process. This is where the wort is separated from the grain and moved to the kettle, leaving the grain behind. The grain is rinsed with more hot water, extracting all the sugar, color, and flavor. Wort is collected in the kettle until a volume of about 250 gallons is reached. The spent grain is removed from the mash tun and given to a farmer to use as animal feed. After the wort is collected in the kettle, it is boiled for at least 1 hour. Boiling sterilizes and concentrates the wort. Hops, the third ingredient of beer, are added during the boil. Hops added at the beginning of the boil are converted into bitterness, which is measured in IBUs, or International Bittering Units. Hops added late in the boil result in hop flavor and aroma. After boiling, the wort is whirlpooled and then allowed to rest. This causes any solid material, called trub, to settle to the bottom of the kettle. The knockout is the process of pumping the wort through the heat exchanger and into the fermenter. The heat exchanger uses cold water to chill the wort down to the fermentation temperature. The water is heated and collected in the HLB to be used in future brews. After the wort is chilled, oxygen is added to aid in yeast health and reproduction. From the heat exchanger, the chilled wort is sent into one of 2 types of fermenter, an open fermenter or a conical fermenter. Open fermenters allow for harvest of yeast from actively fermenting ales by skimming it from the surface of the beer. Conical fermenters allow for fermentation of ales or lagers, and yeast is harvested from the cone on the bottom of the tank. As the wort fills the fermenter, the final ingredient, yeast, is pitched into the tank. Prior to the brew, yeast slurry has been viewed under a microscope to assess its health and to count the number of cells available for pitching. We then calculate the number of cells needed for that fermentation and convert it to the weight of slurry required. We weigh the yeast and then pitch it into the chilled wort during the knockout. When the knockout is complete, the wort begins the fermentation process. Ales are fermented at 70 degrees and lagers are fermented at 52 degrees. In fermentation, the yeast consumes the sugars produced from the malt during the mash and creates alcohol and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide bubbles through the airlock, allowing it to escape the tank while preventing any contaminants from entering. In open fermentation, the yeast ferments the beer in the same way. However, the actively fermenting yeast is visible on the surface of the beer. After fermentation is complete, the beer is chilled to 40 degrees. The yeast settles to the bottom of the tank and is harvested to pitch into a future batch of wort. The beer will condition in this tank at 40 degrees until it is ready to begin the cellaring process. The cellaring process takes place in the cold room in a series of bright tanks. Cellaring encompasses both clarification and carbonation. The first step is clarification, where we move the beer to a bright tank while adding isinglass, a clarifying agent. The beer will sit in this tank for a few days while the isinglass binds the yeast and drops it to the bottom of the tank. Once the beer is clear, it is moved to another bright tank where the carbonation process begins. Carbon dioxide is pushed through a carbonation stone, which slowly carbonates the beer. The brewer checks the carbonation level using a scientific instrument that measures the volume of carbon dioxide dissolved in the beer. When the beer is fully carbonated, the tank can be tapped, sending the beer to the faucets at the bar. This completes the brewing process, and the beer is now ready to be served and enjoyed. On behalf of the brewing staff, we thank you for your interest in the brewing process and encourage you to continue learning about craft brewing throughout your employment with the company. We take great pride in the quality and craftsmanship of our beer, and hope that you will too. Cheers!